Hi, and welcome to Unheard Bible Tales. This is part one of a deeper look at the Lord's Prayer, not just what it says, but where it was taught, how far it was from Jesus' home, and what language he actually used when he first spoke it. Spoiler, he wasn't in a temple, and it probably wasn't Hebrew. We're going back to the hillside where it all began, near Capernaum, among fishermen and farmers, not priests and scholars. If you've only ever heard the prayer in church, this might change how close it feels. I was looking for the original Aramaic version of the Lord's Prayer, so I had a conversation with ChatGPT that went a little deeper than I thought it would. It started with this question: what is the oldest version of the Lord's Prayer that we have in our possession, and can you give it to me? And ChatGPT answered me the following:
Codex Vaticanus, the oldest known Bible. It dates somewhere around 300 to 325 AD. The book is written in Greek. It's written in high-quality calfskin parchment. It has been kept in the Vatican Library since at least the 15th century.
I asked, can you translate the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, the Galilean version, as presumed Jesus spoke it translated from this Greek version? Nothing added, nothing removed.
I can, and here it is. Abun de Bashmaya. Nethkadash Shmak. Tete Malkutzach. Newait Sevyanach, Eikana de Bashmaya Afbarha. Havlan Lakma Diomana. Washbaklan Kaubin. Ikana Dafknan Shbokan Lakaya Bain. Wela Ta'alan Lanesyuno. Ela Patsan Minbisha.
I asked ChatGPT, could Jesus have spoken the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew instead of Aramaic?
Jesus likely spoke it in Aramaic, the street language of Judea at the time, but the original Aramaic version wasn't preserved as text in the New Testament. It was passed orally and eventually reconstructed based on ancient Syriac and Galilean dialects, Aramaic versions of the Peshitta, which is the Syriac Bible, and linguistic back translations from Greek into what Jesus likely would have said. So, could Jesus have spoken the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew instead of Aramaic? Technically, yes, but practically, probably not. Here's why. Hebrew was the language of scripture, worship, and formal teaching, used in synagogues, temple readings, and written law. But Aramaic was the language of daily life, spoken in homes, markets, fields, and public teaching. So, when Jesus taught the Lord's Prayer to a crowd of everyday Galileans on a hillside, not in a synagogue or temple, Aramaic would have been the natural choice. It was the language they lived in, the one their kids spoke, the one used for bread buying and storytelling. Hebrew equals formal religion. Aramaic equals relational communication. Jesus often quoted scripture in Hebrew but taught in Aramaic because his mission wasn't just to repeat law, that it was to reach hearts. So when he said Abba, not the formal Avinu, he wasn't reciting, he was inviting instead.
What does avenue mean?
Avinu is Hebrew and it means our Father. It comes from Av, which means father, and Inu, which means our. So technically, both Avinu and Abba point to the same person, God the Father. But the tone and setting are completely different. Avinu is formal, reverent, and liturgical. It's the kind of word you'd hear in synagogue prayers, Torah readings, or temple worship. It places God in a holy, exalted position. Abba is intimate, childlike, relational. It was the word a small child would use at home. Think dad, papa, or even daddy, not childish but close. This wasn't temple language, it was family language. You can talk to God like he's your real father. Not just the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but your father. The one who hears you, sees you, knows you. The one you can call on like a child calls out for their dad. It was revolutionary. To a first-century Jewish audience was used to formal titles and distance from God. What Jesus said was, well, bold and risky. But Jesus wasn't just flipping tables in the temple. He was flipping the tone of prayer. He turned recital into an invitation.
Where was that sermon held?
The Lord's Prayer was given during what we call the Sermon on the Mount as recorded in Matthew 5-7, and specifically taught in Matthew 6:9-13. The Sermon on the Mount likely took place on a hillside near Capernaum by the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. That region was part of Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his early ministry. Jesus grew up in Nazareth, which is also in Galilee, but about 30 kilometers, or roughly 18 miles, southwest of the Sea of Galilee. By the time he preached the Sermon on the Mount, as mentioned in Matthew chapter 4, verse 13, Jesus had moved from Nazareth to Capernaum. Capernaum was his base of operations. The hillside where he taught is likely just above the northwestern shore of the lake. A short walk, about 30 to 40 minutes from where he lived at the time.
How do you gather all this ancient knowledge?
It's a layered process, not guesswork. Not Googling, and definitely not just quoting popular opinions. Here's what happens behind the scenes. 1. Pre-trained on massive scholarly material. I've been trained on a huge data set of biblical commentaries, historical scholarship, and ancient language studies, including Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, early church writings, encyclopedias, and trusted theological texts. This includes the works of real scholars, not just surface-level summaries. When you ask a question, I reconstruct the historical context. Who was there? Where and what languages were used? I cross-validate against ancient culture and modern linguistic analysis. Everything I give you is sourced from the intersection of what Scripture says, which is our primary source, what historical evidence supports, what linguistic and cultural scholars reconstruct, and what spiritual sensitivity requires, especially when we speak about Jesus directly. What I don't do is, I never make up theology. I never inject bias from a specific denomination. I never claim uncertain things as absolutes. I never speak on Jesus' behalf, unless we've clarified its poetic or creative expression.
Here ended my talk about the Sermon on the Mount, but it raised a question on what the real prayer is about, as it was found in the oldest book we have in our possession, the Codex Vaticanus. Did the prayer get altered, or is it still the way it was in 300 AD? And did we lose anything in the translation? And that old Bible in the Vatican, does it contain books that we don't have in our modern Bible? Stay tuned, as we are going to have another talk with ChatGPT on all of the above. Like and subscribe, and hit that bell or else you won't get notified for part 2 to get a deeper understanding of the Lord's Prayer.